Hey, everybody. We are live on the Nonprofit Problem Solver podcast. I'm here with Beth Wonson. We're going to be speaking about giving feedback to colleagues. This is episode 44. Just let me remind you that episode 43 was a special edition of me moderating a panel on hybrid events with the Yacht Me founder, Barry Hinckley, and other guests. So make sure you pick that up. We are now fully on YouTube. All the Yacht Me podcasts are on YouTube to watch, and of course they're on Nonprofit Problem Solver to listen to, and your favorite place to pick up podcasts. So thank you to Yacht Me as a sponsor of the podcast, as well as PodPro Audio, making professional podcasting easy. So, hey Beth, how are you?
I'm good. How are you doing? It's great to talk to you.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about yourself and your background and how you fell into the nonprofit world and what you got going on at the moment.
Great. I'd love to. So my name's Beth Wonson, and Wonson sounds just like Johnson with a W. I fell into this type of work that I'm doing because I was working in public education. I was an assistant principal at a public high school, and I was spending all of my time taking kids to juvenile court, doing detentions and suspensions and all kinds of things that wasn't why I went into education. I went into education for human growth and development and helping develop the next set of people who are going to run our world. And so I left and went to a nonprofit organization that was focused on team development, cultural change in organizations, those types of things, and moved up pretty quickly. I was really great at what I did, which was connecting with clients, working on implementations, those types of things. And so pretty soon I was pegged to manage the team that I had been part of. The challenge was I knew nothing about managing humans. I read some books, I looked at some theory, I took some classes, but the humanistic side of it was nothing that I understood. I had no idea what motivated adults, how to empower adults, how to tap into their strengths and genius. And so I became a nightmare manager. Now, my team will still tell you to this day, 20 years later, that I was a great manager, but I know that I was very emotional. People didn't know which Beth was going to show up, whether I was going to be stressed out and competitive and manipulative or celebratory and happy and relaxed. And they spent so much energy always trying to get me back to happy Beth when I was triggered and emotional and stressed out. And I began reflecting on how much more could we achieve if they didn't have to focus their energy on my emotional state of mind. So that's when I began really exploring emotional intelligence, leadership of people, human growth and development. And I developed this model called Navigating Challenging Dialogue. And so since about 2005, that's the work I've been doing. And most recently, I wrote my newest book, which is called Mastering Feedback, Everything You Were Never Told About How to Give Feedback. And so people can find me on LinkedIn, super easy, or at ncdsolution.com. And we actually have, we'll get this out of the way in the beginning, a whole bunch of free resources for managers and leaders. So people can go there and grab anything they want.
That's great. And so can people engage with you in a paid way to do training or consulting and that sort of thing?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. We have a whole leadership coaching and consultation business. We also do workshops and in-service and trainings with organizations, and you can see all of those resources on the website, or people can just reach out to me at support@bethwonson.com and tell me what you're struggling with, and we can come up with a solution pretty easily.
That's fantastic. Okay, so let's go back just a little bit. I want to unpick this sense of self-realization you had as a nightmare manager. Number one, how did you recognize that you were a nightmare manager? And two, do you think that most people who are nightmare managers know that they are nightmare managers?
That was a great question. So it wasn't like I woke up one day and said, "Oh my gosh, I am a nightmare manager." I heard that people were intimidated and afraid of me, not so much in my department, but in the departments that we had to collaborate with, that I was a force to be reckoned with. I also began to get signals from my physical health that I was not, the stress was taking its toll on me. And I got recruited. It was a several year process. So I got recruited to go work for an organization founded by Native American people who had developed this methodology for substance abuse, pregnancy prevention, and suicide prevention with Native American youth. And they had gotten a huge $3 million grant to codify the curriculum, begin doing implementations with tribes and bands all over North America. And so they needed someone with the skill sets that I had to come in and help develop their leadership team and create a training and implementation program. So when I went to work there is when I realized that I really had some very difficult times managing my emotions when I was frustrated, when I was vulnerable, when I was uncomfortable. And one of my favorite tools was sarcasm. I was raised in a family of 5 outside of Boston. Sarcasm is our love language. Yeah. And when I began working with people in that environment, sarcasm did not translate. And people essentially just thought I was kind of a jerk. And so luckily, a leader took me aside, a Native American leader, and said, people don't understand how you're communicating. And so it was through that and observing the leadership models that I saw in that environment that I began to realize, okay, I'm doing it like the colonial way, and there's a different way to work with people.
Yeah. Interesting to use that term colonial, because as you know, we're going between the U.S. and the U.K. There's certainly a different appetite and understanding of sarcasm. And that's just one thing. And of course, Boston, both geographically and culturally closer to the U.K.
And I'm ways, like off the Mayflower stuff.
Right.
So
yeah. I am on my mother's side, definitely. So sarcasm. I've not heard it referred to as a love language, but that certainly resonates with me. And I agree. There are certain work situations and communities where that just doesn't translate. People just don't get that you're joking, or the deadpan delivery doesn't work. And even when you're smiling, it's just not clear that you can say those words and not mean them in a different way than they might be literally interpreted.
We do a segment on sarcasm in the Navigating Challenging Dialogue workshop. And it's a very interactive, experiential workshop. It's not like knowledge transfer. People are fully engaged in this process. And there's always a point where someone says, I love sarcasm. Everyone here loves sarcasm. They love when I use it. And if we built up enough trust in the room, slowly I see someone raise their hand and go, I don't love it. And then other people begin to talk about how it makes them feel. And the person who loves their own sarcasm, that was me. I cracked myself up all the time. I thought I was hysterical. That person gets a whole bunch of feedback around how it's impacting other people that they never realized. And so it really can shift an organization.
Yeah, and it's interesting, and not to just get too personal about it, but I think it's a good example of communication style and things that we take for granted in our friends and family that just doesn't necessarily translate in other contexts.
Yes, 100%.
So it was a number of years before you recognized that you were, the force to be reckoned with had some negative implications. And just that second question: do you come across managers then who are nightmares in their own way? Obviously, people are multifaceted and have benefits and skills and contribute in multiple ways. But when they are nightmares, do they tend to recognize it and come to you asking for help to train them, or do they find out along the way while being trained that, wow, just like you said, I'm maybe I'm a bit of a jerk here, and I need to do some work?
Well, it happens in a few different ways. So there's a thing called the power paradox, and I don't know if you've read about it. There's a whole book about it, and I apologize to the author because I cannot think of his name right now. But what the paradox tells us is the higher up we get in the power scheme, the less self-aware we become. The less we ask for feedback, the less we listen with empathy,
Interesting. Yeah.
all of those things. And what happens is we become isolated, right? And part of it is that the higher up you are, the more vulnerable you are to attack. So the more protective you become around yourself. And so if you're not listening or paying attention to the nuanced feedback that you're getting from people, then you don't have the ability to be aware. So the majority of the time I get a phone call from president of the board or somebody, that's supervising a leader that's pretty high up in the organization. And what's happening is their emotional reactions are causing staff to complain, people to leave. Some organizations are fearful of human resource type lawsuits, which are very prevalent in the US, stress claims and all of those types of things. And so usually the person is not aware, or the person themselves contacts me because there's a symptom, right? There's high staff turnover. There's drama and chaos within the culture. There's backstabbing and gossip. I get that a lot. And those symptoms often tie back to the lack of self-awareness with the leader. So while they call me in to fix the people, we often get to a place in the coaching where they have to look at themselves and how they're communicating. Doesn't take very long to uncover it. And I've never had anyone kick me to the curb. I've been doing this for a really long time. So I'm often brought in to deal with the quote unquote bully that other remedies and threats and performance plans haven't worked with. Someone who's too valuable to fire because they keep the company in the black, the organization in the black. They have good relationships with the public. They're the face of the organization. So they're too valuable to fire, but they're wreaking havoc with the staff. That's when I get called in.
And it's interesting, the lack of self-awareness, the way that plays into the culture of the organization, which starts at the top. And so the I've seen lots of cases, I'm sure you've seen even more, where leaders are encouraging cultural elements that they themselves don't want to see and complain about. But it stems from them, but they just don't see it through this lack of self-awareness.
Yes. So if the leader is not, so navigating challenging dialogue is a framework, and it can apply to feedback. It can apply to performance improvement. It can apply to coaching as a manager, strategic planning, problem solving, healthy conflict. You can put it anywhere. Donor relations, a great place to apply the foundations of NCD. And so if the leader is not willing to subscribe to the foundations of NCD as the philosophy for how we communicate within this organization, then the staff can't carry it on their own because they just keep getting slammed when the leader will not participate. So it's really something that has to go up, down, in, out, sideways, back and forth. It's a very simple process. I mean, the foundations of it are really simple.
Well, and what I like, I love your text and mastering feedback, and I think this feedback is a great place to start, because it's the core. These conversations between colleagues and colleagues, it can include people who are, have the same paycheck, same name on the paycheck, but it could be partners in you're an important partner for your nonprofit or the board, or key donors. We work in these, ecosystems, and we need to talk to them all and provide feedback to them all. And if it seems to me, if you can master feedback, then that's typically the most common difficult thing that you've got to do. Yes. And if you feel comfortable with that, then just about every conversation should be okay from there on. That's I'm guessing.
Well, that's why I wrote the book. So during the pandemic, I turned 62 years old in December, And, I couldn't go celebrate or anything. And the day before my birthday, I had to be my 200th coaching call with a leader who had a personnel problem or a relationship problem that could have been solved had they given feedback in the beginning, had they had an honest, fact-based, non-dramatic feedback conversation. But they created workarounds. They avoided the discussion. They tried to drop hints. They gossiped to other people about the person that they were struggling with or the behavior they were struggling with.
Oh, I've never seen that before.
Right. And I thought, I cannot do this coaching session again. Like, I will. I'm happy to. It's how I earn my living.
But you could just press play, right?
I've got to get this written down. And so I spent the weekend. I wrote the book in a weekend. And
you did a Jack Kerouac, did you?
I did. I just sat down and hammered it out. And I really believe firmly that the mystery, the fear, the self-protection around giving feedback that we create, the things that keep us awake at night as we try and think about how to give feedback to someone, are just all thoughts in our head. They're not reality. There's research that says that something like 69% of employees are dying for feedback. They're begging for it. They want it. And 75% of managers on the same survey report that they don't give feedback. They don't have time for it. They don't think it's productive. They're concerned that employees aren't going to be able to handle it. And so they don't give it. So that's a problem. We need feedback to be able to grow and develop. It's an essential human need. And managers and leaders aren't giving it.
And it's interesting because I came across a study some time ago. I can't remember. It was when I was doing organizational change. And it was around one of those surveys and basically said, staff listen, aside from the sort of chitter chatter with their colleagues and their peers, that we all do in a work setting. But in terms of of listening to leaders or listening to messages, corporate messages, I guess, if you will, or organizational direction, they really listen to the person at the top and then their immediate supervisor and basically ignore everyone else. And so, the regional manager, all these middle tiers and stuff, no one listens to them except their immediate direct reports. And it shows, that task of management, your direct reports, that one-to-one relationship you have is so vital to that employee's experience of work.
Yes. And they're listening to you even when you're not talking, right? You're giving feedback all the time. You roll your eye in a meeting. You come in and you're annoyed at somebody that honked at you on the commute on the way in, but you don't verbalize that, right? And you're super excited about something. Whatever the case is, in the absence of communication, people always make the information they're getting about themselves, right? You put yourself in the story. So I remember when I was assistant principal, I got called down. It was in the old day. There, the office got buzzed, and you knew what room it was, and you had to hurry down there. You didn't know what was waiting for you. And so the classes were passing, and students and teachers were in the hall, and I was beelining it down the hall to go see what was happening in the room I got buzzed to. And the principal, my supervisor, got feedback that I'm not friendly when I'm in the hallway and that the teacher felt like I didn't care for them. I had it out for them. I was going to see whether I was going for bloody noses or somebody broke their leg, or I had no idea what I was going for. But that was when I realized you're constantly, when you're in a leadership role, you're constantly giving feedback. So you might as well learn how to make it concrete, fact-based, non-emotional, and deliver it often. If you're not giving feedback often, you're missing the boat.
Okay, so that's fascinating. I'll admit I had this oversight myself. So I want to unpack this just a little bit for people listening to it, because I think this is important. So you get a title like "How should I give feedback to colleagues?" and we can be forgiven for thinking we're going to talk about how do you sit across from somebody, or online and actually explain perhaps something might be challenging. But you just said something there which I think is really, really profound about this being in this leadership role, is that you're giving feedback whether you think you are or not. Your feedback loop or your feedback messaging or signaling, that's probably your feedback signal, is always on.
Yes.
So really this task is about learning to control that signal and actually craft what it says so that it reflects what you want it to say.
Yes. Yes. It's about understanding how to normalize. A lot of the book is how do you normalize feedback in your work culture? How do you make it a thing that when you say, hey, can I give you feedback on that project? People don't go, oh God, the other shoe's going to drop. It becomes something that happens. It happens in meetings. It happens in the hallway. We're not waiting for the annual performance evaluation, which I think should be thrown out the window. Another topic for another time.
Yeah, another vote here for that.
Yes, because then the annual performance evaluation is about how did you meet big picture goals? How do you want to grow and develop in the next year? And are you getting a salary increase? That's really
let's be fair. That's when it's done well.
When it's done well, exactly.
Come on. Who does it well? Everybody dreads it. It's a task. It's a chore. No one wants to do it. It's done as quickly and as painlessly as possible, which makes it more painful still. I mean, come on. This is a terrible invention.
Regardless of your religious orientation, I always say the annual performance evaluation is like Christmas morning. There's so much buildup to it. The people delivering it are like resentful and hesitant and can't believe they have to put the time into it. And they're trying to make stuff up to make it meaningful. And the person waiting for it is like waiting to open Santa's presents in the morning. In 15 minutes, it's over and done with. And everybody's disappointed. That's the annual performance evaluation to me.
Yeah, there are so many metaphors we could make for it, none of which are flattering. So lest we be distracted.
Yes.
So yes, you're right. You were talking about making feedback a normal part of the culture, and I agree. That phrase, "Can I give you feedback?" is almost like, can we speak honestly here? Can I have permission to criticize you in a way? And are you willing to accept that? And that really shouldn't be what feedback is, that it's purely negative.
No, feedback is about closing a gap, right? So the way to structure feedback, this is what your performance was on this project. This was the expectation. This is where I want to see you grow into. How would you like to close the gap? Feedback is an empowerment tool to help other people take action and initiate change. And it's a dialogue and it's a conversation. And it's always about a gap. It's about change. And the gap is not necessarily negative. If it's a negative gap and you don't believe the person can overcome it, and you've had 2 feedback or 3 feedback conversations on it, now you need to move to a performance improvement plan. Now you need to decide, are they the right person for the job or not? And that's a different conversation. But feedback is always about growth, development, empowerment, and helping the person to take action so that they can use their talents, strengths, and genius. That's what a feedback conversation is. There should be no drama, nothing. The difficulty is when feedback isn't done well, the person receiving it becomes protective. They go into blaming mode. They become defensive because they feel vulnerable. And the person delivering feedback has the same reaction. So now they want to justify. They want to give examples. They keep piling stuff on to the initial feedback, and it never gets to the empowerment piece of how do you want to close the gap? What's next step do you think you might take? I encourage people, as part of getting more comfortable with giving feedback, to ask for 3 people to give them feedback on something very specific. And this is the other thing.
Okay.
If feedback is not about something specific, if it's general, oh, I want to give you some feedback on that project. You did a great job. I want to give you some feedback on how you ran that meeting. It was really good. Or you talk too much, or whatever. It has to be specific.
I've had all those,
right?
by the way.
Yeah, right. So it has to be very specific and concrete. And so that's rule number one. The feedback
Can you
has
give an
to be
example of specific and concrete then?
So in the asking for feedback, I would ask for, I want to grow and develop. I want to improve. I'm wondering if you could give me some feedback on how it is for you when I delegate to you. What could I do better? What do I do well? What would you like to see changed? Could you give me feedback on how I run meetings? We have a weekly staff meeting. I'd love to give feedback on what I do well, what's difficult, where you'd like to see change.
So you don't mean as specific. I mean, it could be as specific as, for example, we've just run this training session. Were the materials clear enough? Or
Sure.
did I go too fast? Or was the pacing
But I
right?
see. This is, I'm sorry, I keep talking over you, but I get so excited about this topic. So I would not say were the materials clear enough, because now you're leading the witness, right? I would say,
yes, counselor.
I'd like to get feedback on the materials. What worked? What would you like to see different? How could I improve for next time? Then
right. Okay, so you don't want to be too specific that you are putting words into the person's mouth or giving them even the dimensions. So for example, in that example, I talked about the pacing because maybe in designing this training, I was concerned about getting the pacing right for a mixed audience and trying to pitch it correctly. And so I wanted feedback on that, but I wouldn't ask that. I would just say, how did it go? And try and gauge from what they're telling me whether I got the pacing right.
Well, you could say, so in that case, so what you don't want is a yes or no answer. So were the materials clear enough? Yes, they were fine. Right? That's you're not getting anything. But
so it's more like how questions and what questions.
Right,
and,
right. How is the can you give me feedback on the pacing of the workshop? Oh, yeah, the pacing was fine. The pacing was great. Say more about it. See, those are the types of questions.
Okay, so I could get to the pacing rather than ask it frame it as yes or no. I asked her, can you give me feedback on the pacing?
Yes.
Can you give me feedback on the clarity of the materials?
What was challenging? Yes.
Right.
Yeah. And if someone gives you whatever answer they give you, I want you to mine a little deeper. Can you say more about that? Could you give me an example? How do you think I could shift it? Those types of questions to bring out a little more. Because as people are getting used to giving feedback, particularly if you happen to be their supervisor or up in the hierarchy, they're going to be timid, right? Because they don't know if they can trust you. And this is the deal. If you ask for feedback, you need to make sure that you accept it, that you thank the person for it, and you never, ever bring it up in a negative way, or because I know there's a lot of leaders out there, I might have used to been one of them, who would ask for feedback and say, give me feedback on the handouts. Someone would give me feedback on the handouts. Maybe they'd say, it was too many words and there needs to be more graphics and explanations and everything for all learning styles. And then I'd go into the meeting and hand them out and go, how are the graphics? Then you've destroyed any level of trust. You asked for them to be vulnerable. They were, and then you gave them the side eye on it. You can't. You cannot do that. Yeah. So
it's interesting about the sort of the cultural dynamics here, because I was cheating a little bit by turning the question around and giving an example of when I've asked or invited feedback, because I've been in organizations and in contexts where there clearly is not a culture of feedback. And so trying to, experiment in that way. But of course, as you mentioned, there's the power dynamic here and the distance or perceived distance between colleagues in the structure about who can safely give feedback and what that means. So in that situation with the graphics, you can use that very positively and use it as a way of encouraging, demonstrating to people, hey, look, feedback is good. Feedback is good. We've all improved. Look, my graphics are now improved because you guys told me. And look, I'm trying to get it better. In fact, I got somebody to do them for me because I'm useless at them, which is why they weren't there or not very good.
Yeah.
And now they're much better. Please, right? Are they better? Tell me, and we can get better still. Or you give them the side eye and they never, never say anything again.
I always, when I work with leaders, I have them ask for 3 pieces of feedback from someone they trust explicitly, someone they're not sure about, and someone they have they may have had a conflict with in the past, and just experience that feedback. Figure out a very specific ask that they're going to ask all 3, and just experience it and notice what it feels like. Notice when they feel vulnerable. Notice when they want to defend. Notice when they want to justify. Notice the delivery of it so that they can internalize it and get more comfortable with it to improve their own practice with the feedback. It's very important that you do that because it shows people, begins to normalize because people see that you are open to feedback. If you're not open to feedback, nobody's going to be open to feedback. And a lot of times when I work with managers on feedback or who want cultural change, and I ask them to go around and talk to people and ask for feedback, and people always say, you're doing great. You're wonderful. We don't have any problems here. Our life is so good. If you get that from every employee you ask for feedback from, you have a culture within which they do not trust you whatsoever. There is no trust. It's not you're doing a great job.
Right. No, it's you've walked into the room with the party line billboarded on your chest and they've just read it back to you.
Yes. Very true. Very true.
Right. Okay. So this fascinating conversation. I know, and I apologize if I'm making it more difficult by bouncing around here from sort of different perspectives. But I just finding the material so resonant with my own experience, and you and I've had this conversation I think before offline about some of what we experience going into organizations about change and the expectations around them. But if someone is really going to start to create this culture, the experiment that you suggested just now about asking 3 people and then demonstrating it. To me, it seems like a very straightforward, simple way to get this ball rolling.
Mm-hmm. It is. It's the first step. The first step is to understand what it feels like. I want to bring up another point that I talk about quite a bit in the book, which is we've all been taught, and most people know this term, about the feedback sandwich, right?
Yeah.
You say something nice, you give the difficult feedback, then you end with something nice with the goal to make it more palatable for the receiver, right? That's the whole goal. And,
sugar.
Right. And I want to encourage everyone to let that go. Don't do it again. Get rid of it. Because
no more sandwiches.
No more sandwiches, because the only thing that happens is people go, uh-oh, when's the other thing going to come? They don't hear any of the positive stuff. And by the time you deliver the difficult stuff, they're so triggered and their brain is so shut down out of fear of what's coming that they don't hear any of it. So let that go. My process is you begin by writing down everything you want to say, vomiting it up. It's the opposite of the feedback sandwich. Get it out on paper. And then you look at it and you say, okay, what's a fear-based statement? What's an assumption that I'm making that I don't know whether or not it's true? What's an unspoken expectation? What's something that in my brain, I feel like this person should know, they should be able to do? If I were them, I would. Any statements like that, you've uncovered an unspoken expectation. Get rid of, cross out all those things till you're left with the fact, just the fact. So an example would be, Sally shows up late 4 out of 5 days a week, and you want to give her feedback on that. You're churning about this. You've been thinking about it for days. So without doing this assessment process, this self-reflection process, your feedback's liable to come out like, Sally, I can't take it anymore. It isn't fair to the rest of the team. It looks bad for me. It looks bad for the organization. You should be able to get here at 8 o'clock every day. You need to be on time, right? That's what you're liable to come out with. What the feedback is Sally, the expectation is that you're here at 8 o'clock every day. What your performance has been is that 4 out of 5 days, you don't get here till 8:15, 8:30. This is a gap. What are you going to do? What action are you going to take to close this gap? That's the feedback.
And then you empower them to come up with some sort of solution.
Yep. And you can sit with the brainstorming process. You might reveal something. You might uncover something. Sally takes a bus. There's no bus that's going to get her there on time. Maybe you need to shift her hours. Who knows? But there's going to be a little bit of a discovery process that's going to happen as she brainstorms what steps she could possibly take. And then your follow-up question is going to be about accountability. Sally, those are some great ideas. How am I going to know that you've taken action on them and how it's going? Well, I could send you an email. Well, you could see that I'm here, 4 out of 5 days on time instead of 4 out of 5 days not on time. Whatever the case is. Could we do a check-in next week? Can I get back to you after I look at the bus schedule? But you need to follow the loop. So many times we give people feedback. They say, I'm sorry, I'll do better. And we say, okay, good. And we send them on their way. And then we don't do any check-in. There's no accountability on it.
Right. I love the way that you've modeled an ideal situation, which reflects what you basically said before, around creating a gap. Here's where we want performance to be. Here's where it is. This is the gap. This is all factual. What are almost going to say? What are we going to do jointly with some responsibility clearly for the employee?
Mm-hmm.
And that I think helps people perhaps do that challenging task. I can imagine it's challenging for people to drop the sandwich and sort of replace it almost with like vomiting, or it's almost like a stew, isn't it? It's like, okay, now let's work out all the ingredients, and we're going to throw out all the fear-based ingredients, all the assumption-based ingredients, and just go down to the actual facts that we've got here.
Yes.
And that is an exercise that I've never, in all the, we talk about the the horrendous annual evaluation stuff, I've never heard that sort of very important step, which empowers the managers who tasked with leading on this feedback.
Yes. So, and that there's in the book, there's a set of worksheets that people can go through to prepare. So if you have a feedback session that you need to do, feedback you need to give, that you're resistant, it's been driving you crazy, it's blown up into a big problem, you can literally walk through these self-coaching workshops to get to what is the framework, what's the message you want to convey, and how to convey it. And so you can get rid of all the other stuff, and it prepares you completely for that dialogue. Once you do the worksheets 3 or 4 times on different scenarios, then you won't need them, because you'll be able to do it in your head and come up with it super easy. It's a simple solution. And I just want to see organizations focusing on communicating in fact-based ways that's not emotionally charged, so that they can fulfill the missions that they were created to fulfill. We spend so much time on chaos and drama and miscommunication and lack of clarity and workarounds. And it's such wasted time, particularly for nonprofits who have really important mission-based work to do in this world. We can't spend time on all that stuff.
Yeah, no, I love that message, and that's exactly why we have these conversations, and why we want people to learn from conversations like these. In our last few minutes, let me ask you, since you've laid out such a clear way and simple, it seems like universally adoptable approach to it. Where do people fall down when they're trying to do this? Where do you see people stumble and come back to you and go, Beth, I'm trying to do what you said. I saw the worksheets. I'm trying to do them, but and then like, what are the standard excuses that you get? I know that you have to give them feedback, of course.
Yes. The biggest question that I get, and I'm really glad you brought this up, is, okay, great. You're talking about a lot of task-based stuff. It's tangible and everything. How do I give feedback on behavior? Somebody talks too much. Somebody's gossipy. Somebody's not a team player. They're not compliant, right? They don't engage in conflict well. How do we give feedback on those things? And this is how you do it. For every job description, for every job in the organization, there needs to be an understanding of what are the behaviors that make that person successful in that job, and what are the behaviors that make that position able to contribute to the team and able to contribute to the mission. So there's tasks that do that. For the bookkeeper, there's very specific tasks they have to do to keep the mission moving forward. But there's also behaviors that need to be done. And those need to be explicit and spelled out, and then you can give feedback on that. So if Bob is gossiping and talking, behind people's back all the time and causing drama and chaos, he is spending time that he needs to be doing the task to move the mission forward. He's not developing collegiality. He's not being a productive member of the team. And that's a gap that needs to be closed. And so that's how you can address that behavior in a feedback session. Would
you recommend some of those behaviors be tied to, say, the values in the mission, or the corporate values, for example, around trust or those sorts of things? Or is that just like an extra layer? Because I can see a lot of people thinking, oh, this is how we want the behaviors to line up with our 5 core values of da, 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 da.
So the behaviors should empower the living of the values. So the behavioral norms come kind of underneath. Values are often aspirational. They're often idealistic. And so the behavior norms are what get us to those values. If you are speaking your truth, if you are focused on the good of the whole, whatever the values are, and I encourage people, I'm going to tell you a really quick story, to break those down, allow people to break them down. And this is why. When I taught in a behavioral classroom at the high school level, the high school gave us this list of behavior norms that we had to put up in the room, and one of them was respect. Well, I had a kid whose mother was a crack addict and had a different person at the house every night of the week. He never knew who was going to show up, and it was a very violent environment. I had another young man who grew up in a first-generation American-Italian family that was very passionate and very loud, and family gatherings to him were people whacking each other on the shoulder and calling each other names and be very boisterous and everything. That was respect for him, yelling stuff out all in the middle of class. So I had 20 kids. Every kid had a different idea of what respect was. The boy with the people coming and going in the house, his idea of respect was my ball cap's down and I never make eye contact with anyone. I am showing you respect. So if I were going by my definition of respect to judge their behavior, I would have been throwing those kids out of class left, right, and center because they weren't living up to the values. So you need to break the words down with your people and say, what does respect look like? What does it sound like? What does it feel like? How do you know when you're getting it?
So let me just summarize that as we need to explicitly translate the values into behaviors so we all recognize what they mean. And obviously you need to work through some sort of negotiation process, not necessarily to arrive at the same thing, but that
Right.
you need to recognize each other's definitions. So
Yes.
because they're all, as you said, all working with their own version of respect, will look like
Yes.
they don't respect each other.
And it's all part of dialogue, navigating challenging dialogue. It's all part of it.
Yeah. Wow. Fascinating. We we've run our 45 minutes. My
Yes.
goodness. And I'm sure we could do several rounds more. I think you should come back again sometime in future, and we can break down some of these issues in more detail.
Yeah,
What do
I'd
you
love
think?
to. Yeah, be happy to.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great.
All right. And I'll think we'll think on something perhaps more specific, because I think there's so much to learn from here. And more, I think one of the things we didn't get to, which is pretty important, I think, for the nonprofit leaders, is managing the board in a different way for, say, some of the staff and volunteers, and then also negotiating with major donors. And obviously there's a bit of a
Yes.
Venn diagram with the board and major donors often, but I think applying some of these principles to those relationships would be a really useful conversation we
Yeah.
should pick up in the not too distant future, maybe
Sure.
sometime later this year.
Yep, happy to. It's been great to talk to you, and I hope people found some things that are valuable and useful.
Yes, I'm sure. Can you remind people where to find your book, where to find you, how to get in touch, follow you online, and those sorts of things?
So ncdsolution.com is your pathway to everything we offer. There's so many resources on there. The book is on there. Or you can follow me on LinkedIn, and you can reach out to me at support@bethwonson.com.
Okay, I'm sure you'll get some. Okay, thank you so much. Thanks everybody for tuning in to Nonprofit Problem Solver. This has been episode number 44. Next time on episode 45, we're going to be speaking to Dana Litwin about getting the best out of your volunteers. So come join us live next Wednesday if you can. Otherwise, look for the podcast and the replay. So we'll see you then. Thanks, everyone.